Linux phones, not Android phones. Those are completely normal. And I know Android makes use of the Linux kernel, but I mean actual Linux phones. Droidian, Phosh, Plasma Mobile. I have heard many times about Linux in the mobile space, and many of the things I've heard were not pleasant, and you've probably heard many of the same things as well. Linux on a phone isn't ready, Linux on a phone is bad, Linux on a phone is wasted time, but I had never actually gone and tried it myself. I didn't know what the experience was actually like. And then a company known as Fury Labs reached out to me with their FLX1 device. This is not a paid product placement, anything like that. They sent this to me free. I keep the device, but that is the end of the relationship there. I can say whatever I want. And I am surprised, I think is the best way to put it. I expected unusable garbage. It's not perfect. It might not be good depending on who you are, but it's surprisingly usable. Now, I can't speak for any of the other distros out there or any of the other GUIs, but this is running a distro known as FuryOS. For all intents and purposes, it's a modified version of Droidian, which is basically Debian for mobile, currently based on Debian Trixie with a Linux kernel version of 4.19.325, which is now an EOL kernel, which seems like a weird choice to me, but sure. When it comes to a Linux phone, there are a lot of people that want to be very specific about what a Linux phone is and how a Linux phone differs from a regular Android phone, not just in the operating system it is running. So what Pine is doing with the Pine phone and what Fury Labs is doing with the FLX1 is a little bit different. This is a true Linux phone. It is basically a Linux computer in the form factor of a phone. The FLX1 relies on something known as Halium. Halium is used to run Linux on top of a regular Android phone. So at its core, this is just an Android phone, but it's running Linux. Now, is that an important distinction to every single person? It may not be. At the end of the day, the thing you are interacting with on this phone is going to be mobile Linux. And at least for me, that's the thing that I wanted to talk about. Now, as its GUI, it is making use of something known as Phosh. This was created by Purism and is built off of the GNOME stack, so it's going to have a lot of GNOME design inspiration, which, if you like that, you like that. If you don't, well, you know. Now, I know Linux people like to talk about, wow, it's Linux, I can do Linux things on a phone. But when I'm looking at a phone, the very first thing that I care about is, does the phone? Can I do phone things on a phone? Can I use 5G? Can I do voice over LTE? Can I do SMS? Can I do MMS? Well, if you insert a SIM card into this device, all of that stuff works. And that is not a thing you can say for most of the Linux phones out there. You can actually use this as a phone. I know for some of the other devices out there, some of those features are there, but the basic things that I want from a phone, all here. And you get the accompanying applications to do all that stuff as well. A phone application, a messaging application, a contacts application, and are they the greatest implementations of those tools you'll ever see? You know, people are going to argue one way or another. Is it functional? Yes, completely functional. It does the things I want from those programs. And here's something that wasn't exciting at one point, but kind of is nowadays. It has a removable back. Also, it has dual SIM, which is nice, but I don't use dual SIM, but it has a removable back and a replaceable battery. And with that, it also has IP68 water resistance, which is 30 minutes, 1.5 meters, which, you know, unless you're going swimming with your phone, is perfectly fine for just normal, hey, I spilt a bit of liquid on my phone. Now, I need to talk a bit about the SIM thing, and this isn't specific to this phone, but it is something you have to keep in mind if you're importing a phone, or like me, was sent a phone. When I first tried my SIM, I couldn't get a cellular connection. I thought it was something to do with the phone. Turns out it's actually related to my carrier, and my carrier Vodafone, which works perfectly fine in the rest of the world, in Australia, has a whitelist of supported devices. So if your device not on that list, you just won't get a cellular connection. Why is it like that? I don't know, because Telstra's not like that, so I've got a $5 Audi SIM in the phone, and it works just fine. And there are some American carriers which do the same thing as well. I believe in Europe it's not a thing, because they have laws there that make sense, but if you put a SIM in and it doesn't work, it's very, very likely that is going to be the problem. Okay, you've got a SIM that works, you can do regular phone things, but it's a smartphone. What about the rest of the phone experience you expect on not a modern device, something for the past 18, 19 years? Well, by default, you have two software stores available. You have GNOME software where you can install your debs and flatpaks, or you could do it from the terminal. I'll talk about terminal use in just a bit. The other one you have is F-Droid. Now, let's start with the latter, because I said this is a Linux phone, but F-Droid is used for installing Android applications, so how does that work? By default, it has something known as Wavedroid installed. This allows you to run Android inside of a container, and this lets you run, basically, most of the Android applications that you want to run. But F-Droid is pretty limiting. F-Droid is a store of Phosh applications on Android, so things like, Duolingo isn't going to be available on F-Droid. But do you know what is on F-Droid? Something known as Aurora Store. Aurora Store is basically a Phosh implementation of a front end for the Google Play Store, and you can just install whatever software you want from the Google Play Store here. If you want to install Duolingo, there you go. If you want to install Spotify like I have, there you go. Keep in mind, there is going to be some exceptions here for applications that rely on the Play Integrity API. Because this isn't using the Google services, this is using MicroG, which is, again, a re-implementation of the Google services. Applications that need Play Integrity will not work. So you might find, games not working, banking applications not working, but most other things are probably going to be fine. At least the things that I've tried have been fine. In my case, though, the main things I want are Spotify, Bitwarden, and Facebook Messenger, because we don't use WhatsApp here for the most part. Most of my family, friends use Messenger. I don't like having Discord on my phone. Discord works fine as well, though, if that's what you want to do. But the main thing for me, 100% Spotify. I know Spotify, blah, 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 you can talk about how bad Spotify is. I use Spotify. And you know what? I'm going to give it a pretty good compliment. For the most part, it just works. Emphasis on most part. So, when I've shown you applications running, you might notice something distinctly missing. An OS level back button. Android has this, so a lot of applications are not going to have in-app back buttons. Some of them will, depending on the context of the application, but having that OS level button there means you're going to have problems on a system that doesn't have the OS level button. Now, it has one, it just doesn't obviously have one. So on the left-hand side of the device, there is this random little brown button. This is known as the assistant button. Basically, it can be remapped to anything you want. So, if you want to have a back button, basically one of the bindings needs to be the back button. If there is a different way to approach this, I'm not sure what it would be. Now, there's also a problem with trying to send files in the Android applications. They're not going to see any files. If I try to send something on Messenger, for example, even though there are pictures on this phone, it will not know where the pictures are. It will not be able to find them. Yeah, that's just kind of a problem with storing files in different locations, doing things in containers. It's fine for the Linux applications. All that stuff's good, but the Android stuff kind of expect things to be where they expect it to be. They don't really have the concept of, like, full file browsing in a lot of cases. Also, when you run things in Wavedroid, it is going to consume a lot more battery life. It is getting better and better every single update, but they are going to use a lot more than the regular applications on the system. Now, let's talk about the Linux side of things, because this is also a bit of a mixed bag. So, our graphical method to install applications is the GNOME store, and it's the GNOME store. If you like GNOME design methodology, it's fine. To be fair, the Google Play Store isn't great either. It's just walls of information everywhere, and it's just ads upon ads upon ads. So I don't really think there's anything good in the mobile space. Now, even though this is GNOME software, even though this is installing debs and flatpaks, it's not going to have every single thing you see on a regular Debian system. This is a phone. It is an ARM-based device, so only things that have an ARM version available are going to be on here. To be fair though, there's a surprising amount available. One thing you should absolutely make sure you grab is Flatseal, even if only temporarily, because some applications are going to have weird permissions, and even though they should be able to access your files, will not be able to do so. I noticed this for local send. I had to make it so you can access everything on my system, otherwise the application just would not work. But what about the experience of everything else? Well, if you showed this home screen to an Android user, they might think it looks a little bit weird, but not crazy weird. It's clearly a modern looking phone. It's probably just like a weird launcher. I'm not a fan of seeing the minimized applications taking up half the screen. I much prefer the way that Android does it, and I'm also not a fan of an alphabetical ordering in the application list. I like to be able to just place my applications where I want to place them, and then if I want to see a full list, show me a full list afterwards. But again, that's just me being used to Android. This is fine. Like, I can use this. There's nothing horribly annoying about it. It's what I would expect from a phone. So that part is fine, but what matters a lot more is the quality of the applications. And obviously, if you install random things from GNOME software, they could be garbage, they could be good. Some of them may not even be made to be used on a phone. They may have an ARM build for things like Asahi Linux, but let's talk about the things that are actually on the phone when you get it. That is the things that they think are good. I think the best way to explain it is it kind of feels like mobile applications made by a desktop developer. Whilst the applications for the most part make sense to use, there is something really off about the UI and UX. As a reminder, we are using Phosh. This is built off of the GNOME stack. This is not related to that problem, but it's a whole separate problem which I just want to mention. I don't know if it's a stylistic choice or a bug, but at the top of every window, there is a singular line of pixels of my background. I don't know why it's there. It looks bad, and it shouldn't be happening. To the desktop stuff. So there are references all over the place to desktop interaction methods. The image viewer is a great example. Why is it saying drag a file in? It's a phone. I'm not gonna drag a file in. That's not how this works. Also, why is there just completely useless welcoming pages all over the place instead of just showing the content that I want to see? the file roller and the image viewer in this case. Like, why do I have a welcome page and not just a list of files to go and view or a list of files to go and open? In that same vein, if you go click on a lot of the hamburger menus, they are going to list out keyboard shortcuts. There's no keyboard plugged in. If there was a keyboard plugged in, that would make a lot of sense, but again, it's a phone. I think the calendar is another great example of being kinda weird. Phones and computers generally have different size screens, with phones having smaller ones. So on a phone, you typically want to make things a bit bigger to make it so if somebody has issue tapping on smaller things, they can actually interact with it. As an example, here is Google Calendar. Yes, it takes a bit to scroll through, but nobody's going to struggle to click on a date they want to click on. Nobody's going to have issues clicking on the wrong date. This, though, it's basically the desktop calendar just formatted in a way to fit on a phone. It's not a phone calendar. Also, while we're here, if we open the shortcuts, again, it's shortcuts for a thing that doesn't have a keyboard, but the shortcuts extends outside the screen. That shouldn't happen. If you rotate the phone, now you can see everything, but it shouldn't need to happen. It should fit the size of the screen. Also, it opens as a separate application because it's technically a separate window. This is not the only application where things just don't fit on the screen, plus there is your fair share of bugs. Notably, the camera application does not know how to handle horizontal, so if things are horizontal, the buttons are very, very tiny, which not pleasant to use. Rotating applications when you're on your home screen and you have things minimized causes one of them to temporarily take up half the screen, which is annoying. But then there are things which kind of feel like oversights, like the lack of clear naming on random things. For example, Celluloid is the video player. I have GNOME, lets you see image properties. File Roller is for dealing with archives. Geary is your email client. Portfolio is your file manager. But this is next to things like calculator, calendar, camera, clocks, notes, text editor, usage. I don't care what fancy name you want to give an application. If something is pre-installed, it should have a name where if I'm not a GNOME user, I know what the application is. I don't have to infer it based on the icon. If I come back to the phone, if I come back to using this version of Linux, guessing what the applications are called. Just call them the thing they do. And because there is a lack of a global back button, applications that are made for the phone will put the back button where they feel like putting the back button. So you end up with a really messy UX trying to work out how applications function. Applications that are part of the core suite, for the most part, are fine, but the second you start installing anything else, not having a global back button there is just... it really needs to be there. It's what, at a bare minimum, keeps Android somewhat held together. And don't get me wrong, none of this is game-breaking. For someone like me, who... I use KDE, right? KDE is KDE. It does weird things. I've used Cosmic Alpha. I've messed around a bit with GNOME on the desktop. All of these things do really weird things. A Linux user can get used to it, but if you're someone who is, you're like an iPhone user, you're an Android user, you're a relatively non-techie person, it's not in the state that I would recommend for someone like that. One thing I've not mentioned is the lock screen. Now, it looks like a regular phone lock screen. You might notice the lack of a wallpaper. I'll get to that in a moment. Sadly, there is no pattern lock, which is my general go-to. You could argue pattern lock isn't secure. Yeah, I don't really care. Pattern lock is convenient. I like pattern lock. One thing to keep in mind is this is a Linux lock screen. The lock password is your Linux password. This creates a certain problem. The criteria for setting up a password and changing a password is different, and you can change the password under settings, user, and then trying to set a completely normal 4-character pin, the pin is too short. Trying to set a sequence, don't set a sequence. These restrictions make sense for a password. They do not make sense for a pin. In my opinion, something needs to be done to support a dual pin and password system so you can use either one. Use the password for doing things in the terminal, but then have the pin for opening up the phone. Now, you might just say, well, it's just a Linux password. You can use passwd to change the password, and yes, 100% you can. But if I'm looking at something as a phone, if I ever need to go into the terminal to do something, it's no longer a phone, it's a pocket computer. My criteria for something being a phone is something I never need to open the terminal for. Having the terminal there is cool. Being able to do things in that is cool, but I should never need to do it. Now again, I've said this is just Linux and this has a terminal, but I want to make this clear. This is just Linux. It's Linux that looks like a mobile interface, a kind of scuffed mobile interface, but a mobile interface. But the second you go in the terminal, all the stuff you can do on a regular system, you can do here. If you want to go and, you know, run sudo and delete your file system, you can do that. If you want to go and SSH into the phone, you can do that. I was actually doing that with the developers when they were trying to work out if it was my carrier or the phone that had an issue. If you don't want to use GNOME software, you can install things with apt and Flatpak directly. It's just a Linux device, and that part I think is really cool. I think as a weird techie hack around thing, it's a super cool device. The phone part still has some way to go though. You might wonder how to use a terminal on a phone, how would you do Control-C or things like that? Well, there's actually a modified version of the keyboard specifically for terminal mode, which lets you do all of those things, makes it easy to go and type the things you want to go and type in a terminal, like a tilde or a dash or pressing Control with any key and things like that. Obviously, it takes quite a bit to get used to. I'm never going to want to get rid of my keyboard to use a virtual keyboard to type in a terminal, but providing you the ability to actually use a terminal on a touch device, I think is cool. One thing to note about the terminal is the developers do recommend updating with apt. You can use GNOME software, and that probably is going to be fine, but they say it sometimes misses packages, sometimes it misbehaves, and apt is just the recommended way, which, you know, again, it's a phone. Having to do that is a bit annoying. If you do want to mess around with some like pre-development stuff, there is a tool available called Branchy available in the FuriOS-app-Branchy package, which lets you get access to in-development branches. Keep in mind, they're in-development branches, things might be broken, but if there's something you really want to get access to a bit early, that is something you can do as well. Here's a thing that I definitely need to bring up. I didn't realize this until today because I'd been turning the phone off. You might notice the phone is not on the desk at this very moment. So it's over down there charging. So you know how if you leave a Android phone on overnight, it's gonna, you know, lose like, I don't know, 10% charge. If you like have Bluetooth on, you're listening to stuff, yeah. But I mean, like, you just have the phone sitting there, you left it in your bag, you forgot to put it on charge. I left the FLX1 on overnight. Screen was off. I woke up, I started recording the video, phone was off, didn't really bother to check it. I turned it on, the phone had 3% charge. It's a Linux device, and Linux devices, when they are turned on, oftentimes have really problematic battery life. It lasts a day, but you have to make sure you charge it. If you forget to charge it overnight, you will not have charge the next day unless you turn the phone off. Now let's talk a bit about customization and settings. So there are two separate applications for doing this. It feels weird that there are two applications, but they do serve two distinct purposes. The application known as mobile settings, this is for your launcher customization. So do you want to have this in your top bar? Do you want to avoid the camera? Do you want to like lay things out like this? Like all of those settings are in mobile settings, and it might not give you control of every single thing like you might see for something like Launch Air on Android, but it's going to give you a lot more customization than a lot of the default launchers you see on Android devices. The other settings, just called settings, this is your general phone settings. So all of the things you would expect to see on an Android phone under your settings, this is where you're going to find them. Now, whilst you can configure a lot of things that are available in the top bar, some things can't be disabled. Like, I can't disable the button to turn off my location data, for example. I don't ever turn that off. I don't know why I can't just remove the button. That would be, nice to have there. But the way it's configured out of the box, you don't have to go into this settings, right? Like, it's fine as it is. But if you want to go and erase it, if you want to go and customize it, the option is there. I will say this is another completely pointless screen. Why is there a welcome here? Does it do anything? No. No, it's just a holdover from desktop applications. Now, one thing I have to mention is setting a wallpaper. Very easy. You just go to the wallpaper settings. But lock screen wallpaper is a little bit harder. So I don't know if there is an easier way to do this, because this is, again, a problem. I've said this a couple of times now. I don't know how to do something, because being Linux mobile, there's little to no documentation, both community and official. So if there is an easier way to do something, it's the same reason I don't really recommend using just obscure random distros if you don't really know what to look for. From what I can tell, changing the wallpaper of the lock screen requires either going into a terminal or a text editor, and I just don't want to do that on a phone. I know I've been kind of negative on the device. I don't think it is bad, right? The device itself is fine. Linux on mobile is okay if you're someone who uses Linux and you're used to Linux being kind of weird, and you are okay with doing that on a phone. But if you want the Android experience, but Linux mobile, it's not there for that. It's not there for your non-techie friends to use. But if you run Hyperland, you can get used to it, right? Like, it's not that difficult. It's just a little bit funky. And that's okay. Right now, if you like to purchase one of the devices, you can get them on their website for $550 which is also a problem you see whenever we talk about these Linux phones. They are low production devices, and low production devices naturally are going to have higher costs. It's the same thing with any of these other devices, right? Like, PinePhone's also going to be more expensive than the hardware would indicate, but this is a completely competent phone. If I go between my regular Android phone and the FLX1, I don't really notice a difference in regards to performance. The only difference I notice is this thing is considerably lighter. The FLX1 is quite heavy. If you're curious about the spec sheet, you can see all of that here. Feel free to pause at any point to take a longer look. Also, it will be linked in the description down below. Now, the biggest question of all. Is this a device that I will daily drive going forward? The battery problem wasn't something I was going to mention initially because I didn't know it was a problem, but that also makes it really annoying. Battery life I need my phone to last a day, and I need it to not be completely dead if I forget to charge it overnight. Usually with this thing, if I forget to charge it, it'll be fine. I don't use my phone that much. This can basically last 1.5, 2 days with the amount that I use it. That thing can't. The FLX one definitely can't. You need to make sure you charge it every night or turn it off. And I use my phone as an alarm, so turning it off is not going to happen. You need to make sure that you charge it. The other reason why I'm not going to daily drive it, though, is Bluetooth. Bluetooth works, but it's Linux Bluetooth. And, well, so initially works great. I connect my earbuds perfectly. No issue whatsoever, they connect. You do have to go into your settings and then go to the sound settings and then change the device you want to output to on the first connection, which is weird. I don't know why it's like that and doesn't automatically go to the Bluetooth device. That would make sense, like it does on Android, like it does on iOS, but you can go into the settings and change the thing. The problem is when I disconnect and then reconnect. My earbuds start making this very staticky noise, and they're literally unusable. Like, it's not a little bit of static, it's cutting out and static at the same time. The only fix that I found for it is restarting the phone. The problem is they're wireless earbuds. Oftentimes, I'll take them out, put them back in their case, and put them back in. I'll do this when I'm, like, working or at the gym and someone talks to me. So not being able to reconnect my earbuds consistently is just a complete showstopper for me. I actually cannot use the device like that. The main time I use my phone is listening to music or a podcast at the gym. And if I can't do that, knowing it's always going to work, I don't want to fiddle with a phone when I'm at the gym. I'm there to lift heavy rocks. I'm not there to play with my phone. However, if you don't use Bluetooth or for whatever reason your earbuds work, like maybe it's just my earbuds, I don't know. It's entirely possible. I've tried both of them. They both have the exact same issue. So I doubt it's my earbuds, but I don't have any more devices to test. Anyway. And you're okay with some, like, rough edges. At least in this form, Linux Mobile is actually usable. Surprisingly usable. Not perfect. Not good enough for non-techie people. But actually okay to use. But let me know your thoughts down below. I have had some people suggest to me maybe I should go and buy like a OnePlus 6T or something like that and chuck something on there because you can use Halium with that as well. And I might go and do that. I don't know. I'll have a look-see. If I can get something cheap, I'll go and maybe do so. I've said that about the Chromebooks. They're still sitting on the shelf. Yeah, I probably shouldn't promise to do anything. Anyway, I think this is a cool device, and I'm happy that I got to try it out, and I'm happy to see the state things are in, and I might have to keep an eye on mobile Linux and just see where things go. I'll keep an eye on this phone. If it, if those problems are dealt with, I might have to do an update video. We'll see. Anyway, if you like the video, go like the video. And if you really like the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon, Scribes, Liberapay, linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and surprisingly, actually usable. Like this.